going on, you outdoor mavericks? Welcome back to the channel. In today's trout fishing tips video, I'm going to go through the top 5 trout fishing baits underneath bobbers and floats. So if you want to become a better trout angler using bobbers and floats, stick with me and stay tuned and let's go through the top 5 baits. Now coming in at the number 5 bait is going to be MICETAILS and JIGS. Now MICETAILS and JIGS are two different kinds of baits, but they both have something in common, which is they have motion underneath the water that's going to attract the attention of the trout. MICETAILS are a great option underneath the bobber or a float because with the mice tail, a little bit of flow in the water is going to get that mice tail moving around, which is going to give that bait some action in the water and get the attention of the trout. Plus you got the power bait scent with these MICETAILS, which trout really love. Now when it comes to jigs, you got the marabou feathers on there, which you can add a little bit of scent to, but also add some wavy and motion to the water. Now the thing that I like to use with jigs is to tip these with some NIGHTCRAWLERS because trout are little stinkers and they'll try to steal your baits really easily. So if you tip these with some NIGHTCRAWLERS and they end up stripping the NIGHTCRAWLER off the jig, you still got a little bit of NIGHTCRAWLER scent on the jig, and that same trout or a different trout could come in and strike that jig for a second bite. Now with MICETAILS and jigs, you can fish these in different bodies of water, whether it's small ponds, slow moving creeks, some different river systems depending on the flow and where you're fishing, but you can also fish these in shallow edges on big lakes where the trout might be hanging out in shady areas. Now the main reason I like each one of these is because of the motion in the water that each one of these put out to get the trout's attention. So grab some MICETAILS and jigs and get ready to have a trout party on the water. Now coming in at the number 4 bait is going to be power bait. Now conventionally, power bait is a bait that you fish for trout with a bottom rig off the bottom. However, it's become more and more popular to fish power bait suspended underneath a bobber or a float in recent years. Now when it comes to bobber fishing, a lot of anglers overlook using power bait as something to float underneath a bobber or a float to go after trout. Now in specific conditions, power bait is really good underneath a bobber or a float. Now first off, on small ponds that are really grassy in that late spring and summertime when you really got to go to a bobber and float technique, putting power bait underneath there is a really good option bait. Now the other reason I like power bait underneath bobbers is because you can change the size of how much power bait is underneath that bobber. So in the early springtime, you can go with a smaller presentation. In the summertime, you can go with a bigger blob of power bait and get the fish's attention. So if you're having a slow day, grab some power bait, put that underneath the bobber, and you might have some success right away. Now coming in at number 3 are salmon eggs and trout eggs. Now there's a couple different ways to fish salmon and trout eggs. One is to plunk them off the bottom, but a really good and effective way is to fish these underneath a bobber or a float. Now what I've found with trout eggs and salmon eggs is no matter what time of the year, the trout will go after the eggs. Now with trout eggs and salmon eggs, these are a great bait year-round underneath the bobber in different water conditions and different bodies and styles of water, whether it's small ponds, lakes, tiny creeks, little flows behind spillways, and even big river systems. Now if you're talking rainbow trout, brown trout, and brook trout, these eggs are a great way to go after those trout. Now when it comes to fishing salmon eggs and trout eggs, I love fishing these in small creeks. There's just something about the flow of the water, getting these underneath the bobber and being able to get them into positions in areas where the trout might be held up in that water in the slower moving current to get that bite. And when it comes to winter trout fishing, bobber and eggs is one of the best techniques to get those winter trout bites to sometimes happen. The small size of these eggs is a great way to size down in the wintertime when the fish don't want the bigger baits to get the fish to get a bite and get a hookup. And a tip with the eggs that sometimes these come with scent and without scent, and you can add scent to these, and I would recommend that depending on what time of the year, add a little scent spray or a little bit of gel to add just a little bit extra onto this bait and get ready for some massive bobber downs. Now coming in at the number 2 bait is going to be flies. Now when it comes to fishing rivers and creeks, having indicator floats with flies is one of the best techniques to go after trout, and for fly fishermen, it is the uber ultimate technique to go after trout. But don't overlook going with a straight slip bobber, some split shot, and some flies underneath, especially if the trout are busting the surface or are in the top part of the water column. But having the flies underneath the water, even just a couple of inches, could be the ticket between a day where you don't catch anything and a day with ultimate and uber takedowns. For all you anglers that aren't big or haven't got into fly fishing yet, using an indicator float and some flies is a really good technique, but even adding them underneath the bobber is still a really good technique as well. No matter what time of the year or where you're fishing across the country, having an indicator float and a fly is always a technique that's going to produce some bites. Now before we get to number 1, I'm going to show you guys a kit that has everything including bobbers, jig heads, and grubs that has everything that you need to go out trout fishing with a float that you can easily take to you on any body of water. So if you're looking for something that has floats, baits, and jig heads, check out LELAND'S Lures Trout Magnet Kit. Now this kit is great because it has floats in here, it has 2 different colors of jig heads in the 152 piece kit, which are silver and gold, and in this kit they have 11 different colors of grubs that you can use underneath the float system to get a trout bite. Now I gotta say, fishing with this trout magnet and sore lip and a ton of trout is a super amount of fun, but if you want to pack in light to wherever you're fishing, this kit has the one-stop shop of everything that you need to get started for float fishing. And I would recommend going with the 152 piece kit. So if you're looking for a gift for somebody's birthday, Father's Day, or whatever time of the year in celebration of something, grab one of these trout magnet kits and it's the perfect gift for the trout angler. Now the number 1 bait for underneath bobbers and floats is gonna be night crawlers and worms. Now the reason that night crawlers and worms are number 1 for trout fishing baits underneath bobbers is because they fish really well in all kinds of water conditions, all kinds of weather conditions, and all kinds of different bodies of water. Whether it's small ponds, lakes, streams, and even high mountain lakes where sometimes you can only fish real live bait, night crawlers are the go-to. Now when it comes to fishing baits underneath bobbers, worms gives you the most consistent trout bites throughout any time of the year, whether it's in the spring, summer, fall, and even in the winter time. Now when I was a kid, we would go out to the garden and go dig up some dirt and get our own fresh night crawlers the night before going out for a trout fishing adventure. However, I'd still make my dad bait all my hooks with the worms, and it wasn't until I was like 21 where I actually had to bait my own hook with the worms. I just didn't like doing it, but it caught us a ton of trout. So if you're heading out for some trout fishing and gonna use a bobber, make sure you got plenty of worms and night crawlers with you and get ready for some epic bobber downs. So then for a few extra bonus baits that you can fish underneath bobbers is to use corn, power eggs, and nuggets, all of which are really good and used in the right water conditions and the right fishing areas can produce some really epic bites underneath bobbers. Alright guys, and that's my top 5 trout fishing baits underneath bobbers. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and make sure you stock up and got all these different baits to use underneath bobbers to go after some epic trout bites. So if you guys liked today's video, hit that like button, subscribe guys if you love trout fishing tips, and other outdoor content, and don't forget, and as always guys, the outdoors is a gift. Share it with others.